On September 16, 1918, a violent chain reaction begins deep inside the heavy monitor Glatton. She is moored in the congested waters of Dover Harbour. Without warning, a low-order blast in the midship's 6-inch magazine erupts into a fast-spreading cordite fire, a spontaneous, devastating detonation from within her own hull, not an enemy strike. The initial blast instantly destroys internal bulkheads, ruptures vital command conduits, and fundamentally alters the structural integrity of the vessel. Dense, toxic smoke and localized fires immediately erupt upward through the armored deck. The ship instantly transforms from a heavily defended weapon of war into an active, volatile hazard right in the center of a crowded military anchorage. The primary tactical problem is the uncontrolled cordite fire now raging in the midship section. Naval cordite can burn with a brutal, self-sustaining ferocity in confined spaces, driving extreme heat and toxic smoke through the ship's guts. In that kind of sealed, choking environment, the usual tools of firefighting become slow, dangerous, and often useless. The initial magazine explosion completely severs the longitudinal access routes along the main deck of the ship. This massive physical destruction totally isolates the aft section. The forward magazines are successfully flooded by Commander Neston Diggle, the ship's captain, who implements a rapid and decisive damage control protocol. However, the critical aft flooding controls remain totally inaccessible. They sit trapped behind an impenetrable wall of dense smoke, to twisted steel girders and raging flame. No damage control party can push through this lethal atmosphere to reach the primary seacocks. The aft magazine, packed heavily with large caliber shells and raw propellant charges, is entirely cut off from the sea. It remains completely dry, constantly absorbing the tremendous thermal energy radiating from the midship's inferno. This crisis rapidly scales from the localized loss of a single monitor to the potential obliteration of the entire port. The physical geometry of the anchorage creates a fatal trap. Moored only about 150 yards away is the ammunition ship Gransha. She is packed with high explosives destined for the front. Dover Harbour is tightly packed with fully armed destroyers, fleet auxiliaries, and transport vessels. If the unchecked fire inside Glatton reaches the aft magazine, it will trigger a massive secondary detonation. The resulting overpressure wave and supersonic shrapnel will instantly rip into the hull of Gransha. That subsequent blast will act as a massive amplifier, leveling the surrounding fleet and laying total waste to the coastal town of Dover itself. The domino chain is rigidly established by simple proximity. A ship fire leads to a magazine detonation, which leads to an ammunition ship vaporizing, which leads to the total destruction of a vital strategic naval base. Commanding officers immediately recognize the brutal mathematics of the disaster. Lines are run, hoses and harbor craft surge toward the smoke, but there is no realistic time to tow a burning monitor clear into open water. The only clock now is the heat climbing below decks. The strategic imperative becomes brutally simple and entirely cold. The ship must be destroyed to save the harbor. The fire must be drowned by the sheer volume of the ocean itself. To extinguish the deep internal blaze and prevent the catastrophic secondary explosion of the aft magazine, Glatton must be forcibly sent down to the harbor floor immediately. This requires a severe tactical decision. The Royal Navy must intentionally sink its own warship right in the middle of a secure, friendly anchorage. The order is given to execute a point-blank scuttling operation. Friendly destroyers are ordered to fire heavy torpedoes directly into the burning hull. The intent is to rip open the underwater compartments, let the sea violently rush inside, and immediately quench the massive cordite fire. But the plan runs into a simple engineering fact. Glatton was built to take torpedo damage and stay afloat. Deep inside the boiler room of the Monitor, stokers had developed a fatal operational habit. After clearing the heavy furnaces, they routinely shoveled out glowing red-hot clinker and ash. To clear the deck plates quickly, the crew piled this extremely hot waste directly against a specific steel bulkhead to let it cool. They did not fully grasp what lay on the other side. The heavy steel plating was not just another internal boundary. It was the direct physical bulkhead of the midship's 6-inch magazine. Steel is a highly efficient thermal conductor. It does not block severe temperature changes, it actively transmits them. By piling hot ash against the wall, the crew inadvertently created a perfect, insidious thermal bridge. The heavy metal plate absorbed the extreme localized temperatures from the glowing clinker. It then radiated that concentrated thermal energy directly into the highly sensitive, adjoining explosive compartment. This continuous heat moved silently through the solid steel boundary, entirely bypassing the heavy vault doors, airtight seals, and locked hatches specifically designed to keep the magazine secure from external threats. Inside the magazine, the naval architects had installed heavy defensive lagging over the bulkheads to shield the ordnance from routine heat. A thick layer of cork insulation was fastened over the steel with wooden lining beyond it. But sustained furnace heat bleeding through the bulkhead did not arrive as a single dramatic blaze. It arrived as relentless, invisible loading. Over time, the cork could dry, degrade, and begin a slow, hidden combustion of its own, building heat and flammable gases inside a locked space. In that trapped atmosphere, the temperature could climb until cordite charges stowed hard against the boundary were driven into a violent ignition. The explosion erased the direct evidence, so a court of inquiry sent engineers onto the sister ship, Gorgon, to strip back the same boiler room magazine boundary. When the inspectors carefully peeled back the lagging inside the magazine, they discovered heavily blistered red lead paint directly behind the cork insulation. And this heavy blistering mapped perfectly to the exact spots on the floor plates where stokers habitually dumped hot furnace ash. It was a compelling forensic match. The condition of the identical sister ship strongly pointed to the same hidden heating path. Steel carrying heat into lagging until something inside began to smolder. Investigators could map the damage and reproduce parts of the heating in tests, even if the exact instant of ignition inside a sealed magazine remained elusive. In Dover that day, there was no time for proof, only the need to put the fire underwater. The destroyer Cossack closes the distance and fires an 18-inch torpedo directly at the burning target. The weapon runs true, slamming into the starboard side, then fails to explode, the shot fired too close for the pistol to arm. A second torpedo is launched. This one detonates, blowing a brutal hole and throwing a column of water and smoke into the air. But when the plume collapses, the strike force confronts the same engineering nightmare. The Monitor is still afloat, still burning, and protected by the very design meant to keep her alive. The heavy Monitor was specifically designed for dangerous shore bombardment missions in contested, shallow waters. To guarantee survival against advanced submarine ambushes, naval architects fitted the vessel with massive external anti-torpedo bulges. These thick, complex outer compartments run along the entire lower flank of the ship. They are engineered to act as heavy, sacrificial shock absorbers. When the 18-inch torpedo strikes the starboard side, the massive external blister does what it was built to do. Much of the detonation's force is taken out in the outer structure, venting and crushing through sacrificial spaces instead of punching straight into the ship's vital inner compartments. The extreme underwater overpressure and violent gas expansion from the torpedo strike simply vent outward or safely dissipate entirely inside the crushable, empty voids of the protective bulge. The true main pressure hull of the ship sits deeply secure and completely untouched behind this shattered sacrificial layer. The specialized structural armor actively absorbs the entire kinetic shockwave without allowing a single drop of seawater to breach the primary internal watertight boundaries. The heavy defensive engineering operates exactly as intended, physically preventing the naval strike force from successfully destroying their own explosive time bomb. The heavy warship remains firmly afloat. The internal temperature continues its lethal climb toward the aft magazine, and the surrounding fleet remains completely trapped within the immediate blast radius. Commanding officers order a precise double tap to break the deadlock. With the starboard bulge already ruptured, Mings maneuvers to exploit the exposed section and fires to drive the blast into the inner hull, where flooding can finally take hold. This concentrated, massive secondary blast finally overwhelms the heavy steel boundary. The underwater shockwave violently tears open the primary watertight compartments. Thousands of tons of cold seawater aggressively rush into the starboard side of the lower hull. The rapid, asymmetrical flooding instantly destroys the buoyant equilibrium of the heavy warship. The immense weight of the incoming water aggressively drags the starboard side down, forcing the massive vessel into a severe terminal roll. The ship lists hard and capsizes, her masts and shattered upperworks striking the harbor bottom as she rolls over. Seawater swamps the burning compartments, finally drowning the deep internal inferno. The immediate magazine threat is smothered under the harbor itself, and the port is pulled back from the edge. The port is secure, but an inverted steel mass weighing over 5,000 tons now lies in shallow mud, narrowing a vital navigational fairway. By 1925, multiple salvage firms have priced the clearance at around £45,000, an impossible figure for a harbor board grinding through a post-war economy. This severe economic trap forces an immediate institutional pivot. The harbor board cannot afford the commercial market, so they must bypass it entirely. Dover Harbour Master Captain John Iron completely discards the commercial syndicate proposals and engineers a radically scaled-down, localized salvage plan. He calculates that by strictly utilizing existing harbor tugs, local dredgers, and in-house personnel, the massive clearance operation can be executed for a fraction of the market rate. He submits a formal proposal to clear the heavy fairway obstruction for a mere £5,000. The harbor board accepts the improvised engineering solution, shifting the operation from a highly funded commercial salvage contract into a gritty, localized industrial clearance mission. Before any lifting can begin, the upside-down hull has to be freed from 7 years of silt and suction. Much of the buried upperwork still acts like an anchor, pinning the wreck to the harbor floor. To break this bottom hold, the salvage crews launch a grinding deadweight reduction campaign. Divers work in near-zero visibility, while dredgers and pumps claw away compacted silt from beneath and around the inverted hull. Where the structure is still pinned, the team uses controlled methods to separate parts of the upperworks that have become anchors in the clay. The goal is brutal and simple: strip away what holds her down and free the smoother mass of the inverted hull so it can finally be shifted. The 12,000 short tons of mud are gone. The heavy anchoring superstructure is permanently detached. The deadweight reduction phase is a complete success, and the local engineers have operated strictly within their harsh economic boundaries. The inverted hull is finally prepped for a heavy lift, but the harbor's own lifting craft are still short of the brute capacity needed for the final break. The salvage operation confronts a severe mechanical threshold. The harbor engineering team has secured exactly 4 auxiliary lifting lighters for the clearance mission. Each individual lighter is strictly rated for a maximum mechanical lifting capacity of 1,000 long tons. The engineering mathematics present an immediate and brutal trade-off. The combined mechanical pull of the 4 surface vessels equals exactly 4,000 long tons. The massive, waterlogged heavy monitor resting upside down on the seabed weighs well over 5,000 long tons. Attempting to physically drag the warship upward using heavy steel cables will instantly snap the rigging or violently drag the surface lighters completely under the water. To save the salvage operation, the engineers must completely abandon traditional external mechanical lifting and shift to a highly aggressive internal pneumatic displacement strategy. Instead of pulling the heavy mass up from the outside, they must push the heavy water out from the inside. When a heavily armored warship capsizes and settles perfectly upside down, the physical geometry of the main hull acts exactly like a massive, open-bottomed diving bell. If the uppermost steel boundary remains completely airtight, high-pressure gas pumped into the flooded compartments will forcibly push the trapped seawater directly downward. The heavy liquid is forcefully ejected out through the open lower decks, replacing dense liquid dead weight with highly buoyant gas. The salvage master decides to turn the inverted wreck into its own primary lifting balloon, using the 4 surface lighters strictly for lateral stabilization rather than vertical lift. Before any air can be injected, the heavy diving teams must completely secure the primary pressure boundary. The heavily armored bottom of the monitor, which now faces the surface of the harbor, is severely compromised. 7 years of submersion, initial combat damage, and standard structural degradation have left numerous open valves, shattered intake grates, and ruptured seams across the exposed steel plating. Divers execute a meticulous and grueling underwater sealing campaign. They weld heavy steel plates tightly over the large hull ruptures. They drive thick timber wedges deeply into shattered pipe fittings and pack heavy oakum securely into the long, leaking hull seams. The dive crews must ensure that the entire upward-facing hull is perfectly gas-tight, creating a rigid, impenetrable canopy capable of holding massive, continuous internal pressure. Once the heavy steel canopy is fully sealed and structurally verified, The engineering crews mobilize heavy industrial air compressors on the surrounding surface vessels. Heavy high-pressure delivery hoses are directly bolted into the highest points of the inverted steel hull. The salvage master gives the order and the heavy compressors engage simultaneously. They violently force compressed air directly into the completely flooded internal compartments. The mechanical delivery rate is absolute and extreme. The surface compressors pump high-pressure gas directly into the sunken wreck at a staggering rate of 70,000 cubic feet per minute. This massive volume of continuous air violently collides with the heavy internal seawater. The trapped ocean cannot compress, so it is aggressively forced downward. The massive internal air pocket steadily expands, physically pushing thousands of tons of heavy seawater out through the severed superstructure gaps and the shattered main deck hatches resting near the deep mud. As the 70,000 cubic feet per minute of compressed air aggressively replace the heavy internal liquid, the overall physical deadweight of the massive warship steadily drops. The internal buoyancy aggressively climbs until it finally overcomes the sheer gravitational pull of the 5,000-ton mass. The heavy steel structure shudders violently as the immense internal gas pressure physically breaks the final residual hold of the deep harbor floor. Slowly, the massive, inverted wreck lifts completely off the seabed, floating heavily on its own engineered pocket of compressed air. The deadweight reversal is a complete mechanical success, but it leaves the hull riding on a bleeding pocket of compressed air, stable only while it stays level. The salvage crews operate under a strict and non-negotiable astronomical time window. A series of critical tides in late 1925 and early 1926 provides the only workable margins to maneuver a suspended wreck through Dover's constrained water. The lift is attempted as conditions peak, then repeated and refined as the calendar turns, with the final relocation completed in March 1926. If the tide drops too far, the hull will ground, break the seal, and collapse the airlift. Heavy harbor tugs maneuver into strict formation around the unstable wreck. Deck crews rapidly secure heavy steel hawsers to the exposed outer edges of the heavily armored hull. The tow is incredibly delicate. The massive, deep load weight of 5,746 long tons is suspended entirely on an artificial pocket of compressed air. Any severe or sudden mechanical jerk from the towing cables could rapidly tilt the inverted hull. A severe tilt would instantly spill the trapped air pocket from the lower open decks, immediately sending the vessel crashing straight back into the harbor floor. The tugs slowly take up the severe tension, engaging their engines to a steady, creeping pace. They gently drag the massive upside-down structure away from its original resting place. The final destination is a deliberate dump site away from the main navigational routes, a steep-sided gully near the western side of the harbor, by the submarine basin and the camber. The tugs guide the inverted hull over the center of the depression. The salvage master confirms the alignment and the tow cables are slacked. Compressors are shut down, pressure valves are cracked, and the trapped air screams out as cold seawater rushes back in. The 5,746 long-ton mass loses its fight against gravity and drops straight down into the gully. The heavy impact permanently embeds the hull deep into the hard clay of the trench. The main navigational fairway of the harbor is finally and entirely clear. The massive commercial choke point is physically neutralized, validating the extreme structural decisions of the localized engineering team. With the immediate hazard removed and the heavy hull permanently stabilized in the shallow waters near the pier, the operation fundamentally shifts from heavy industrial clearance into a formal recovery mission. The heavy steel plating of the lower decks is physically breached to allow access into the deep internal compartments. Dive teams systematically push through the dark, flooded, and heavily destroyed interior spaces. The explosive devastation and the severe 7-year submersion have completely wrecked the internal geometry, but the teams methodically navigate the heavy internal wreckage. Through this slow and grueling internal survey, the crews recover the remains of 58 men trapped behind jammed bulkheads in the original catastrophe. They are brought to the surface, and after the long administrative and forensic road that follows such disasters, laid to rest with naval honors in April 3, 1930. The harbor's immediate physical crisis is finally closed, but the human cost, counted in the dead and the wounded, lingers long after the wreck is moved.